What's up? It's aspiring psychiatrist here today. I hope you guys are having a good day so far. I wanted to quickly make a video on this concept I've kind of thought of called axiom projections. And this may seem kind of complicated at first, but when I break it down, it'll be really simple. As an aside, I really kind of felt bad last video. I sat there and was laughing a lot at kind of the college students and at the host of some of those college debates where there were some pretty big crash outs. So I wanted to teach something that hopefully could reduce that and hopefully could help people kind of think a bit more, I would say, level-headed. And first things first, I guess the most common question is, what do you mean by an axiom? Right? What do you mean by that? Like a math axiom? So you'll hear this from a very few philosophy kind of thinkers. It's not a common term, I don't think, but there's basically this thing called a moral axiom, right? So in the middle, I guess you have whatever value system that you personally ascribe to. Let's just say that, if that makes sense. And then from that, you have, like in this instance, this is the first thing on Google, an aggressive action, a non-aggressive action, a moral action, and an immoral action, right? So if you sat there and said, oh, I want to, destroy all robots, and I want to destroy all robots through, EMP technology, then that would be an immoral action that is aggressive, right? If you just did it for no reason. But if you said, let's say, I want to, feed everyone on Earth, and I want everyone to have food, and I want them all to be, happy and never to starve, and I want to do this through nanotechnology, let's say, that would be a non-aggressive action, right? And so that's the beauty of axioms, is a lot of our fight or flight responses are connected to our emotions. And when you hear something that completely contradicts your personal value system, I feel like personally, there's like this upheaval of, oh, how can you do this? How can you make me feel this way because of your strange perspective, right? But what's really nice about this is it helps you kind of create these emotional and kind of logical models of, oh, this is what these are just the most popular examples. And then we have the most popular, which is the political axiom, right? Tradition, conservative, liberal, equality, leftist, like kind of the split divide. But now that we're done with kind of some examples so that I don't come off disingenuous when I explain my own personal ideas, I'm going to get right into it. Okay, guys, so real quick, we have a pretty fun example. I think you guys are really going to enjoy this. So this is a moral axiom, right? And what we have here, this box will make sense. This is for later when we're filling things out. But what we have here is a paradigm of good, right, and evil, right? And then we have a paradigm of what is possible and what is impossible, right? And so let's say this is a really fun thought experiment. Let's say we wanted to destroy all computers that exist. And we also wanted to do it with a snap of the fingers like Thanos. That would be certainly impossible. But let's say we wanted to, stop all world hunger, but we also wanted to stop all world hunger through robots and automation and AI, right? That would be both good and possible, right? Kind of interesting. And so what is this in the middle here, right? This is kind of where it gets tricky, and this is where we're going to get into some nuances. This, to me, is kind of like the 0-0, right? Or the foundation of your moral views. Why do you think something is good? Why do you think something is evil? What makes it either good or evil? The possible or impossible is more so a material truth, right? If I say that there's a chair in a room, right? Or if I say I'm sitting in a chair or using a desk, that is a material truth. It's a statement of the material that aligns to reality, right? But just because something I say is true that doesn't mean that it's inherently good. And I think I'm going to illustrate this a bit more quickly just so it makes more sense. Let's say we have a fellow here, right? He's sitting there and he's perceiving a chair. The chair is in his room, he knows it's there. The way that he's seeing the chair aligns with reality, and boom, he knows it's true, right? But what's the kind of nuance to this? Well, we have two ways that we see. We have emotions, right? And we have logic. And so logically, we know I see this thing, okay, it's true, that's the conclusion. But emotionally, because I think we have this innate kind of inner child within us, it's like we assume because logically we are right, therefore it is good or moral or virtuous, right? But that doesn't necessarily have to be the case. You can be seeing something really bad, right? Or really, really evil and really awful. And that, just because your perceptions are accurate to that, that doesn't mean that it's actually a virtue in of itself. Back to this, right? This is kind of what I was trying to get to, is there's good, evil, possible, and impossible, right? So what is this thing in the middle, like we were saying? Well, this is kind of like the center of a compass, right? And so you have a few different things that can be at the center of your moral compass. You can have nature, right? Some people are pagan, have a religion, right? Some people are Christian, Muslim, Buddhist, Hindu. I suppose there's some sects, maybe of Taoism, that are theistic, right? You can have religion. You can have the government, right? Some people believe the state is ultimately what determines right and wrong, and the courts and the legal system is what determines what is morally correct. Or you can just have yourself, right? Or the ego, right? And that's why you'll hear about egoist, people who say, morality comes from me, it comes from my subjective kind of worldview and perspective, and it in no way comes from any kind of collective, and there's no collective agreed upon definition of morality by human. Other times, the egoist will also say that morality is relative, right? That there is no actual, like true kind of center of the compass kind of axiom for anything, and that it's all just people debating over and over again, and we simply have to survive for ourselves. Now, I will say I am more theistic in my moral compass. I do believe in a God, but I've had friends who were pagans, who believed in the government exclusively for this matter, who were egoist, who were atheist as well, and they all kind of they were all very intelligent and different, but there was a common trend between all of these kinds of explanations that I've seen happen over and over again. And it kind of drives me a little crazy because I don't see many people talk about this. Today we have some guy named Billy Bob, right? Billy Bob. And Billy Bob is, he's an atheist. He's a nice guy. He's not an evil person. He's kind of like open to God, but he's not really so into it. He's like kind of 50-50, kind of agnostic, right? And let's say Billy Bob sees, he looks so evil, that's bad. Let's say he sees a Christian person, right? A person who, kind of believes in God, a person who's like more religious, and they're espousing some kind of, religious values in the street, right? This is usually what happens. If a person sees something morally that they disagree with, they're like, nah, this ain't working for me, right? They tend to think of that person in some way as being incorrect, right? And maybe that becomes attributed to being inferior, right? It's like, this guy, he's really not that intelligent. His arguments make no sense. Why should I even engage with this person? He's just assuming everyone needs to conform to his worldview, right? And so this is kind of where the whole concept of axiom projections begins to kick in. Because if you're sitting there saying, hey, right, I have my worldview, I'm a, agnostic, right? And it's superior to your worldview, because you're a Christian. And if I also say, hey, you should conform to my worldview, you should be agnostic as well because I'm agnostic. And I think there's a higher enlightenment in that. That's actually a projection of the moral axiom onto the religious or Christian person. And the Christian person can also do the same projection onto the agnostic or atheist person. And so the main point I want to make is that you can't just sit there and impose your moral kind of boundaries and values onto people indefinitely as if that's the sole authority for what is correct or incorrect, regardless of whether you're Christian, atheist, agnostic, Hindu, Buddhist, Muslim, pagan, whatever. You can't just sit there and say, my moral value system with my kind of compass is superior to your compass indefinitely, regardless of the context, because it doesn't make full logical sense. Because no human being in this world truly is a constant reflection of their moral values in a way that is just indefinitely in line with some ideological label they cling to. It just doesn't make logical sense, honestly. And I'm not trying to overcomplicate this. So people have different lived experiences that lead to what they believe, right? And so it's challenging. It's challenging. It's very tough when you're confronted with something that is morally abhorrent to you. A good example is age of consent. You'll see people really get fired up about this. Now, I personally grew up in the United States of America. And because there's so many different states, it's the age of consent here can vary quite widely. It can range anywhere from, and this is a hot button topic, it's not fun to talk about. It can vary quite widely from Georgia with like 16 to some states like Washington where the age of consent unrestricted you'll see some states like United Age Virgin Islands being as high as 18 in the unrestricted category, as high as 19 in Alabama. In some states, in Washington, it gets to be about as high as 21, Oklahoma like 20, but then in some states it gets to be as low as about 16, right, in Georgia, Kansas, Massachusetts. And so we have kind of this cultural norm in America where we sit there and we have certain values and standards where there's a certain threshold you cannot cross. You cannot cross that, right? And so people, when they look at different countries, can be absolutely horrified. Because when you look at different countries, such as, let's say, the absolute lowest being, seems like Afghanistan, it's the age of puberty that would define such. In Sudan, it gets to be about 13 to 12. We have as low as 13 in the Swarmi or Arab Democratic Republic, about 14 in China and Brazil. And so some people, they have this deep emotional reaction of nausea, and how can this be, and how can that ever be okay, right? And I think those feelings are valid. I respect those feelings immensely. But it's tough, when someone has a completely different lived experience from you, it's very hard to impose on them that they have to conform to your moral system. Usually it has to be a compromise, but I respect people where they look at these ages and they're like, this is completely morally unacceptable. I personally agree, but is it realistic or practical to go around and project onto other people that they have to conform to your moral value system? That they have to be right in line with everything you believe? I just don't think it's realistic. That's why I believe in moral axiom projections personally. Here's actually another map. This is of, I believe, Russia, Ukraine, a lot of Europe, right, where you're seeing a lot of numbers as low as 14, 15, 16. I think there's an immense value in understanding that people have different ways that they define morality in their kind of worldview. And then when we discuss like individual perspectives on morality versus if there's a continuous objective morality that's not subjective or relative or contingent upon things that really don't establish it universally, that's where we can kind of get into the meat and potatoes. But personally, I do think it's terribly sad that people, uh, even in some countries, have that low of an age of consent that human beings have to go through that. But that is the axiom projection. I'm not saying it's justified morally what goes on there, but I'm saying I personally can't expect the world to conform to my personal moral standards, and I think that should be 18 is the absolute lowest the age of consent should be. But it would drive me insane if I just sat there and projected onto the world all day that that's what everyone has to conform to. So